So this idea that intercultural communication is first and foremost an embodied experience, right? So we don't come to culture in a vacuum. We come to culture situated within our bodies. And there's an important concept called intersectionality that is really important in this chapter. And I think this is a good example of intersectionality. So intercultural communication is embodied, and all of these socially constructed identity markers intersect, and they really can modify each other. So we're not just one thing. So here, for example, we have race, education, sexuality, ability, age, gender, ethnicity as distinct from race. Race is a pseudo-scientific biological category, and ethnicity is more performative. So like what we, the songs we sing, the food we eat, the languages we speak. Culture, language, class, race, right? So we have these intersecting social identity markers. And what is it? Chapter 1 talked about positionality, right, and standpoint, and how these kind of inform how we stand in relationship to others, how our experiences are nuanced, right? They're not one thing. Certainly, we can have alliances and shared experiences based on gender, right, or based on our age. But at the same time, it's also modified by intersecting identity categories. So, the experiences of, just take, for example, men and women of the same race, right? Because they're different genders, right? We're going to have different experiences based on the intersection of race and gender, right? And the same is true with all of these, right? Our standpoint, our positionality is going to be different whether we're a straight, why is it doing that? Someone who identifies as straight, white, upper class, male, it could potentially be different. Is going to have a different experience of events, culture, than someone who identifies as black, working class, French Canadian, bisexual woman, right? Our experiences are modified by our numerous positionalities. And how we view the world, right, from chapter 1, our standpoint is heavily influenced by our social categories from which we make sense of the world, right? And so, yeah, and that these intersect is also really important, that you're not just one thing at one time, right? And that they really modify each other. Kimberly Crenshaw is the person who came up with intersectionality, and she literally used the metaphor of an intersection, and she was actually talking about Black women, how Black women are not only marginalized because of their gender, right, because they're women, but also because of their race and the ways that these sort of modify each other. And she talks about, so I believe it's somebody getting hit by a car, and you can't kind of isolate the harm based on gender or based on race. It's actually both at all the time. And this also gives us like a concept of what might be called like double marginality or triple marginality, or the ways that oppressions themselves are intersecting, right? So racism and sexism heavily intersect, right? And racism and classism heavily intersect, and racism and classism and sexism heavily intersect, and ageism also intersects, right? These kinds of oppressions and how they affect us is also at work here in intersectionality. And so intersectionality is how these modify each other and how they all affect us. How these, and by all these I mean these social identity categories, which we'll talk about next.